Super Supportive by Sleyca. Chapter 128, Better Watch Out. Team's Guide. Team Cottontail, only the official name in Lute's head. 1 win, 2 losses, 10 members. S. Maricel, Shaper of Ground. Maricel has dark hair and a pixie cut with pink streaks at the back. She is from the Philippines. She first met Alden on the bus. She's been really struggling with becoming an avowed and moving away from home, but 2 chapters ago we learned that she's making friends and she's found a mentor and instructor fragment. Last chapter, she received a mysterious phone call/message and had to leave suddenly. S. Lucille, Strength Brute. Lucille is a girl of normal size, which she mentioned specifically when Reinhardt noted she was going for a gentle giant persona for her hero work. She's very quiet in general. She wants to be a no-kill hero, and has set a goal for herself of not killing anyone even in gym. She's so strict about this that if she ever does, she plans to give up on being a combat hero and switch to pure rescue. S. Jeffy, Aqua Brute. Jeffy has a bright blue mohawk and abs that are pretty average, according to people who saw them when he jumped into the fountain at Cafeteria North upon being let into the school. Jeffy really wants the principal to notice how good he is on land, so that she'll tell Instructor Klein Aqua Brutes don't have to play in the water if they don't want to. We'll see how that goes. He has amazing skills in the water, including the ability to stay under for long periods of time, and a skill that allows him to easily and instantly sink to the bottom with things that should float, or rise to the surface with things that should sink. A. Reinhardt, Meister of Bow. Reinhardt has brown hair that he's recently buzzcut. He enjoys shooting people a little too much and has a bit of a temper, plus a competitive streak. He's been getting along with the team well, though, after the first day. He's worried about the upcoming fight because Vandy counters his arrows well. He's a bit of a superhero buff. A. Lexi, Meister of the Mind Writher. A. Haoyu, Dura Brute. A. Astrid, Morph Brute. Astrid has short, fluffy blonde hair. She also has an ample bosom that she ditches for gym class. Something on her face is usually pierced. She's got a spunky personality, and one of her life goals right now is landing a hit on Instructor Klein. Animal lover. Moose! Raccoons! Plus, she woke up her dog to share the news that she became an avowed. A. Njeri, Shaper of Water. Njeri is on the ice hockey team. She gave a rousing speech about victory recently. She is very competitive, and she made a lot of ice objects in the workshop with Maricel and Everly last run. A. Everly, Adjuster, Ice Spells. Everly Kim is Konstantine's girlfriend. She's half Korean, and she has dyed silver hair. She freezes stuff and has great traction on frozen stuff, and Alden admires her toughness after watching her walk sideways down a frozen rope carrying a sandbag that weighed more than she did. B. Alden, the one and only rabbit. Versus Team Vandy Marsha. 0 wins, 3 losses, 11 members. S. Vandy, Shaper of Sky. Vandy has brown hair and blue-gray eyes. Lutvelra considers her to be quite pretty. She's got a very serious, possibly too serious personality. She always tries to do the right thing and is strict with herself and others. She watches Alden rather closely, always monitoring him to see if he's got a preserved object on him. She wears the school uniform every day to class, even though they don't have to. S. Marsha, Meister of a very intimidating polearm. Marsha is a curvy girl with dark hair and blue eyes. She wears a ponytail in class usually. Her polearm is a large, ornate weapon with a haft that looks like it's made of engraved bone. She can change the shape of the blade on the end. She can deliver a strike with a blade that causes a magical follow-up slice to shoot through the air at a different angle, allowing her to hit physically and magically. A. Mehdi, Agility Brute. Mehdi is ultra-competitive. He looks after his appearance and is a stylish dresser. He's made some rather crass comments about people in intake, and he often challenges Alden and Jim. Alden fails to accept. Sometimes Alden fails to even notice. This might be very frustrating for Mehdi. A. Winston, Speed Brute. Winston Reginald Heelfeather looks like a stereotypical surfer dude, according to Alden. He really has a problem with people who are more popular than him, especially S-rank speedsters with Scottish accents who are more popular than him. He's very actively building his brand online and has been ever since he was selected, to such an extent and with enough success that Everly Kim suspects it's part of the reason he got in the program. A. Unnamed, Shaper of Object. The last time we saw this guy, he was trying to lift Cohn's parents' mattress off the floor, with every girl in the class standing on top of it. This is the reason Cohn had to buy his parents a new mattress. B. Max, adjuster, zones. Max is a tall, lanky, dark-skinned boy who grew up in South Africa, spending holidays with his Anesidoran mom. He is the oldest student in the class and is quite frustrated that he had to struggle so much to gain acceptance into the program. Alden considers him too observant to room with, but he doesn't dislike Max at all. Max had such a bad run with his team last time that he went and spent the night at his mom's place afterwards. Plus 5 A's. Obstacle order. Track, 3 times around. Hurdles are not traditional track hurdles, but walls of varying heights. Pipe, it's bad to be stuck in here when a bunch of vegetation comes through. Firebox, slightly larger than a shipping container, flames shoot out of the walls because that makes it more fun. Weights, differently shaped metric ton and half metric ton weights that must be carried across the floor and up a short ramp to be dropped into designated areas. They periodically reset. Rope climb, all gyms need one. Bar swings, whee! Up near the ceiling of the gym, highest vantage point on the course. Diagonal beam, this is how you get off the platform at the end of the swinging bars. Think very steep and narrow sliding board. High wall, 15 meters, approximately 50 feet. Water, get in there, Jeffy. Tightrope, it's not high off the ground, but there's a movement penalty for falling. Finish line. Chapter 128. From the beginning, there was something ugly about it. Alden's team was missing a core piece. They were worried, nervous, and not sure what they were supposed to be doing now that all their plans had been upset. And the personalities of their opponents added an additional element of tension that hadn't been present in any of the previous matches. The members of Team Vandy Marcia, who had been grim from their earlier losses, suddenly felt like they had a chance. Maricel's absence put a couple of them in a much more optimistic mood. They were excited by the fact that they wouldn't be going up against one of the class's most powerful students after all, and they were too self-absorbed to hide it. Jerkasses, thought Alden, surfacing in the water tank and gulping in a few breaths before he grabbed a third float and plunged downward again. Vandy had been upset about Maricel, of course. They were on their way to being friends if they weren't there already, but Marcia... Alden gritted his teeth and kicked furiously toward the bottom of the tank, shoving the float ahead of him. Even if Maricel hadn't gone missing, even if he and his team members weren't all a little anxious for her, he still thought they would have struggled in this race more than they originally expected. There's something brutal about these guys, and the fact that they have no clear plan of their own fucks up all our attempts to make plans that counter them. Case in point, the game was around halfway through, and Alden was currently doing Jeffy's job. That hadn't even been on their radar as a backup scheme. Things had been weird like this the whole race, starting from the second the other team hit the gym. It was more like they were forcing their way down the course instead of running it, trying to keep up with Marcia, who was so hell-bent on getting first attack that she practically carried the class's one and only vocal brute to the finish line and tossed him over it. Alden's team hadn't been lagging too far behind, despite everything. They decided to send Astrid and Jerry over the line first to give themselves some attack options, and Alden had just finished putting the two of them, along with Jeffrey and Reinhardt, up on top of the wall when the other team's bell rang to announce that Marcia had earned them the right to attack. Okay, How you had said. At that time, he and Lexi had taken a position on the floor at the end of the weights with the intention of forcing incoming enemies to confront them, rather than running toward people on the wall. Let's be wary. The smart thing for them to do would be to wait until they had 2 attacks available so that they could... Or not, here she comes. Marcia had run straight at the two of them, thrown her weapon into the air high over their heads before she reached them, and used her reverse recall to fly up towards it, gaining enough altitude that Ryther only managed to sever an aglet from one of her shoelaces as she passed. She and the polearm, in spear form, hit the floor on the other side of the course hard enough that she had to be at least slightly injured. But you wouldn't have known it from the way she sprang up again and dashed for the wall, where Alden was standing at the base. Even if he had been fully rested and holding a large shield, he wouldn't have been foolish enough to think he could take an S-rank Meister's strike head-on. He didn't want to lose the use of his skill for the rest of the game, so he opted for death. Or he opted for what would have been his death if Marcia was a player who cared about winning more than her own personal agenda. Alden dropped preservation on his paracord and flung a temper sphere at her as she approached, because why not try everything? Then he dove under the tip of the spear and at her knees as she reached him. His first thought was, I can't believe I managed to grab her before she stabbed me. His second one was, oh god, it's like I've grabbed a bear! Marcia didn't even stumble. She just plowed right through him and over him, which didn't count as an attack on her part since he was the one who'd thrown himself in front of the freight train, and she'd made no move at all to injure him. Alden rolled across the floor, gasping, and looked up to see Marcia scaling the wall with another toss of her spear. Reinhardt shot her twice, going for injuries rather than kills, because an injured Marcia was way better for them. She had one dead arm and one half-functional one when she leapt past him and into their tank. To attack Jeffy. In the water. She probably could have taken out Astrid and Njeri, who were also in the tank right then, with one swing. She could have taken out Reinhardt or Alden as she passed. Instead, she took a ton of injuries, let a very confused Jeffy drag her down to the bottom of the tank, and then attacked him after she was on the verge of drowning, for it was basically a murder-suicide that managed not to violate any rules. Killing yourself was a no-go, but being reckless in your pursuit of a target wasn't. Jeffy was upset in the immediate aftermath, but it really wasn't his fault. None of them had given him advice on what to do if an enemy came into the tank with him, and the last thing he'd heard Reinhardt shout through comms was, "I'll make sure not to kill her." So he'd wavered, not sure what the right thing was. That skill of Marcia's that released an invisible strike had speared him in the chest. "That was insane," Astrid said after it was over. "If she had to take out an S, why didn't she go for Lucille first?" Lucille was on the ground at the frozen fire obstacle guarding Everly. She was a much, much easier target than Jeffy. Reinhardt was angry with himself. "Should have shot her lethally. I could have! We just agreed to go for injuries, and I thought arrows to the shoulders would be plenty." "It's fine," said Hao-Yu. "Shake it off, everyone. Especially you, Jeffy. That was basically a wasted attack for them since Marcia's going back to start too. Look how annoyed Vandy is." Vandy did look very displeased. She was sitting up on her team's monkey bar obstacle, brow furrowed and talking fast. "Don't worry so much," Marcia responded on her way out of the gym. Her voice was loud enough to carry. "Their team only has one S-rank with Marisol gone." At the time, Alden wondered rather naively if she'd misspoken, but no. The next several minutes had shed light on the matter. Marcia, who seemed to have interest in taking down the other S's that bordered on an obsession, didn't want to bother with Lucille. On her next attack, she took out Jeffy again, before he could make it back to the water. That time he was ready, sort of, and managed to grab hold of her and chant something as he died. "The hell was that?" she'd asked when the spell did absolutely nothing obvious. "What spell impression did you take?" "That's not going to work on her," Reinhardt said with a groan. "With her skill, why didn't he just punch her?" He was struggling a bit with the fact that he couldn't successfully attack over there himself. High winds were such a good counter to arrows that it wasn't worth wasting a shot, and he would be confining himself to defensive shooting. Their next best attacker would have been Marisol. In her absence, they were going with an unusual combination. When they'd earned their first two attacks, Lexi crossed over to the enemy course with Everly. His job was to use his one attack to protect her from whoever tried to interfere with her, while she cast her ice slick patch over to the ramp that led up to the area where the ton and half-ton weights had to be dropped. It was Everly's most powerful spell, and the ice it created was a bit more arcane than the sort humans regularly pulled out of a freezer. She'd used it a few times versus Instructor Klein, and the stuff was a menace. There was no running across it, only sliding, and it resisted melting and destruction. The other team would have to cajole Marcia into using her weapon to break it up, if they wanted to get weights up the ramp again. The hastily developed plan went well enough. Everly got the ice down and got away. Lexi got killed but managed to wrap Ryther around Medi's arm and fling him skyward first. Everything was going well enough, if Alden compared their team's progress to the others. The race was just chaotic, difficult, and increasingly bitter. As he headed down into the depths of the tank with yet another float, the world went quiet except for the sounds of Astrid and Hao-Yu encouraging everyone through the comms. They were doing their best to counter the negativity and confusion with good attitudes and constant call-outs about what was going on, which couldn't be that easy to keep track of since Vandy had, at long last, gotten fed up with Marcia. After the last risky assault on Jeffy had carried the polearm-wielding Meister right past juicier targets once again, Vandy had started trying to direct the team without any further regard for their most zealous teammates' attacks. Instead of letting Marcia run in a third time, she'd taken her own shot and blown Reinhardt right off the top of the wall with a powerful burst of air. He'd survived the long fall with such a heavy movement restriction that Hao-Yu had to carry him to the finish line. Vandy decided not to let Marcia have her way working around her seemed to have blown any last remaining crumb of team cohesion apart. It was a free-for-all over there, with some of the group thrusting toward the finish line with almost zero help from others, and waiting for the sound of the bell to claim the next attack. You're losing, Hao called. I know it's stressful right now, but just remember that the way they're playing is going to make them lose, even if it is making our own strategies kind of useless. He'd pushed Reinhardt over the line a while ago, and now he was heading to pick up Everly and move her through the course. With Vandy having proven herself willing to attack, they had to take her into consideration as well now. The higher, more precarious positions like the rope climb, the bars, and the top of the wall could become death traps. Hao Yu had a spell impression that made him less likely to be knocked off his feet by blows. He seemed a little sheepish about it because it was a much weaker version of talents his parents had. But it was strong enough to help him resist Vandy's wind, so he'd be making sure Everly didn't get taken down on her way to the finish. Lucille, are you good? Astrid called. You're sure you're fine to move the weights one more time for Jeffy to come through when he's done running track? Yes, she said softly. Under the water, his feet hooked under one trap to keep himself submerged while his fingers flicked open the catch of another. Alden winced. Even that single word, reply, somehow sounded downtrodden. Lucille had launched herself into Marcia's path to protect Jeffy from the last assault. She'd made it there in time with an explosively powerful leap. But then her tackle and the toss that sent Marcia back toward her own course had been rather gentle, especially for an S-rank grabbing and throwing another S-rank. Gentle enough that Marcia had managed to complete her swing and kill Jeffy for the second time. Gentle enough that Winston Heelfeather had seen it and suddenly decided he could get in on the offensive action too. His team's object shaper was over there on their course, quietly turning all of the miscellaneous objects he'd brought into very sharp miscellaneous objects. He'd done the same on their last run. He seemed to want to attack people with them, but he never got around to actually doing it, so maybe it was just his way of staying out of his more aggressive teammates' paths. When their bell rang for the fourth time, Winston had snatched up a wind chime that had been turned into something more like a razor-sharp sickle. He'd ordered up a speed zone for Max, run at Lucille, drove dramatically across the floor, and sliced her calf. Now she was moving the weights with a bum leg. She sounded like she was near tears, and Winston was watching her like a hawk, clearly hoping he'd get another shot. Vandy's sending Max back out to the track again, Astrid reported. He's jogging that way. This is so stupid, Laxi spat. It's like trying to figure out what a bunch of over-energized toddlers are going to do with their superpowers next. Max was doing what he'd sworn he would do and follow instructions. Everyone's instructions. And because his team had nothing like organization since Vandy's break with Marcia, people were countermanding each other all the time. Vandy would send Max out to the track to lay down a trap. Obviously, she thought that her team should have been using him that way from the start. Then Marcia would catch on and order him back because she didn't want him to take one of her attack slots. Or Winston would call him back to lay down another speed zone in front of him, ostensibly so that he could attack faster or run back and forth through the fire. Alden was sure it was really so that he could run as fast as Finlay while he put on a cool expression for the camera. As a result, Max was spending half his time running back and forth uselessly, and the other half casting spells that benefited one or two people for very specific tasks. Someone had the bright idea of telling him to lay down a bunch of float zones under the monkey bars so that nobody would die if they fell off. So that spell impression was now completely gone if Alden's count was right, and there was no benefit unless somebody on their team spontaneously lost grip strength on their way across that one obstacle. Now Hao Yu was asking Jeffy if he wanted to use his land moves on Max, since they were both about to pass by each other outside, and Max was unlikely to escape from an S-rank who gave chase. As long as it doesn't take him too long, Alden thought. Even though he was much, much slower than the Aqua Brute, he was still working steadily there to keep the obstacles cleared so they could send Everly through without waiting for Jeffy to trap all the floats. I was not supposed to have to swim this much. There was no permutation of the plan that called for me being the team's swimmer. He gasped in some more air and went back to it. Everyone was doing their best around all the madness. He was proud of his teammates for not getting too flustered with the state of things. He kept going through it all in his head. It was much more important to keep a mental image of their positions in mind when he was down here, when he had no way to see them. I'm in here doing my job and staying safe from attack unless Marcia decides she'd like to spearfish for a B rank. Astrid and Jerry and Reinhardt are over the finish line. Lucille is still pushing through the weights for us. She's the best for it, even if she is limping. Jeffy will be back in the gym in a minute. Hao Yu and Everly will make it to me right ahead of him, and I'll pull them all up. Hao Yu had helped himself to Reinhardt's bow and used it to shoot arrows into the side of the wall above the tank so that Alden could climb back up to the top when it was time. Reinhardt had been officially unconscious and therefore unable to complain aloud without getting in trouble, but they'd gotten some indecipherable mental texts from him that probably meant something like, "How dare you play with my bow, you swine." He didn't mind people touching the arrows, but he was a little precious about the bow. The current plan, which was the dozenth they'd had in as many minutes, was for the final 6 members to head over the finish line in 2 groups. First would be Everly and Lexi. Then Hao-Yu, Alden, Lucille, and Jeffy wouldn't cross until they were all together. The 4 of them should be able to tackle every obstacle on the course, even if one of them was knocked out by an assault and had to be carried. They weren't even going to bother trying for another attack after Everly and Lexi were over the line. They were just going to run for it and get this mess over with. "I got Max," Jeffy said excitedly. "I grabbed him and did the spell. Do you think he minded?" "I think Max has given up on minding things for the day, Jeffy," said Astrid. "Now hurry back here. Alden is doing your job at 10% speed." Not long after that, Alden got word it was showtime for him, and he pulled himself out of the tank. He heard an all-too-familiar soft sploosh sound behind him as he climbed the few wobbly arrows up to the top. One of the floats had come free of its trap and would have to be put back. Breathing hard, he made it to the top of the wall. Lying flat on his belly so that any surprise attacks from Vandy would be less likely to knock him off, hair dripping into his eyes, he looked over the edge to see Hao-Yu, Lexi, Everly, and Jeffy below him. "Hi there," he said. "Your skill's okay, isn't it?" Hao-Yu asked. "Should we all go up together to save you from having to use it for longer?" Altogether was debatably risky this late in the game, with attacks more likely to come in as the other team gained more finishers of their own. Alden getting knocked off the wall while he was lifting the 4 of them could result in kills and crippling injury for half the team at once. "I'm fine. Let's do it 2 at a time to be on the safe side." "Lucille," Astrid called out from where she watched at the end of the course, "be sure to shout if you see Vandy making shaping gestures." Now that everyone was through the weights for what they hoped would be the last time, the injured brute was bringing up the rear and serving as their watcher. She was up near the ceiling, clinging to the platform at the end of the bars, her strength ensuring a good grip that would keep Vandy from trying to assault her. As soon as Lexi and Everly were over the finish line, she'd slide down the steep diagonal beam to join the final 4 in this section of the course. Alden would pull her up. "And then we can wrap this up." He tied a large loop into the end of cord and lowered it, preserving just before he reached the floor almost 50 feet below him. He pulled Everly and Jeffy up. She gave him a tired smile. "I'm ready for this one to be over with," she said, then splashed down into the tank with the aqua brute. Alden pulled Lexi and Hao-Yu up, feeling anxious the whole way. But they made it to the top too. Lexi dove into the water. While Jeffy dragged him and Everly toward the bottom, Hao-Yu crouched beside Alden, recast his spell impression, and grabbed the back of Alden's gymsuit in a firm grip. "I call this my anti-wind move," he said quietly, eyes shifting from Vandy to Lucille and back. "I appreciate it. Death by falling is no fun." "Sorry you had to swim the whole race." "It's fine," said Alden. "Jeffy's got to do his thing. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of it." In truth, he was getting pretty tired. Speed swimming was exhausting anyway, and doing it with floats trying to drag you back to the surface the whole time was a lot harder. Now Lucille was coming down the beam, using the slide grip slide method they'd all settled on. "She's cry eyes," Hao-Yu sent the mental text to Alden privately. No talking. It was true. Lucille had been getting more and more vocal toward the end of the race against February Shrike earlier, but now she'd almost totally shut down. No matter how many encouragements Astrid sent her way, she seemed to be hanging on to herself by a thread. "She's angry with herself," Alden replied. The team wouldn't be this far along without Lucille. Even if all she did was the weights, it was a huge benefit. The damn things took so much time and combinations of at least 2 people for the rest of them to move. But Lucille had missed chances to take out enemies that another person with her abilities wouldn't have missed, and she was obviously very aware of it. "I was afraid Reinhardt was going to say something to her about it," Alden admitted. "He looked so pissed off after she softballed Marcia, but he let it go." "Good team," said Hao-Yu. Max ran back into the gym with a totally blank expression on his face. Either he'd actually succeeded in putting a trap out there for the first time since the obstacle courses had started, or he'd been resummoned by some team member who wanted to use him stupidly. Alden watched him hit his knees and head through the tube. When he emerged, he laid down to what had to be one of his last speed zones inside the fire obstacle to get through with the minimum possible movement restriction. "Do you think Max trapped the track?" Hao-Yu asked, narrowing his eyes. "They've got an attack, so he could have." The enemy bell rang again. "It's annoying that they have 2 more players than us." Then again, given their complete inability to get along, maybe more wasn't merrier in this case. Lucille hit the end of the beam and limped towards them. Though it's not really limping by any normal human measure, more like strength-infused one-legged bounds that put her at the base of the wall in moments. Alden had the cord preserved and waiting for her. They've got at least one attack for sure now, Hal, you said. They need to take it. Vandy could try to knock Lexi off the tightrope, or Marcia looks like she... Winston, said Alden, spotting the speedster as he blitzed across the boundary between the two courses. Once he'd done that, he was the official attacker for his team for one turn. Lucille, grab on! Let me get you in the air! She hesitated. Alden thought it was because she wanted to try it. To fight back, all she had to do was hit Winston in the leg, and he was done for. The game was over. Everyone knew it. But she hesitated, and you couldn't do that versus people who'd been shaped by the system to be fast. Alden thought Winston Heelfeather was a nasty, shallow piece of work, but he did move like a speedster. Like his stats are telling reality itself, he has the right to move through it quicker than the rest of us. It had been a half-developed concept in Alden's mind until right this second. A slightly different perception of foundation points he'd been arriving at after his last talk with the system, and after watching his classmates do so many amazing things over the past weeks. It's easy to forget when the power looks physical instead of mystical, but there it is, he thought grimly as the wind-chime sickle Winston had stolen earlier flashed across Lucille's throat. Winston's using every bit of his magic, and Lucille's scared to use all of hers. She leaned against the wall below him and Hao-Yu, a devastated expression on her face. Winston's attack hadn't pushed her back even a step, but his aim had been true. Alden was sure she'd just gotten a death notice. Winston paused and looked up toward a drone with a winning smile on his face, and Alden's hands made a judgment call before his brain had caught up with them. He snatched the bag full of unused temper spheres off of himself and shook his whole supply of them out on top of Winston's head. Put it on your website, he muttered, as Winston yelped and ducked, zipping back to the safety of his team's side so fast it was clear he imagined himself to be under a much more serious assault than he actually was. If you hadn't done that, I was about to jump on him, said Hao-Yu. From 50 feet up? I almost certainly wouldn't die, but he might, if I hit him. Bit embarrassing if he dodged, though. Shake it off, Lucille, Astrid called. No big deal, you're the fastest person we have. If you hurry, a freeze spell might still be in effect on the firebox when you come back through. That's right, said Jerry. Get back out here, we're almost done. Sorry, Lucille said, wiping her eyes on the back of her sleeve. I'll hurry. Alden was relieved she was still moving. He'd been afraid for a second that she was going to give up. Oh, man, he said as he watched her go. The track. Hao-Yu looked at him, then he groaned. Max. Alden nodded. It could be trapped, assuming they give him time to do it before they summon him back. Probably is, since Marcia isn't running over here to stab something. He must have used that other attack they earned for it. Lucille can probably bust through. It won't hold an S-rank for long. Might delay her for just a minute, though, Alden said. We don't really need a delay, and he was worried about how she'd react to enduring yet another mishap, even such a small one. Repeat failures felt really bad. They felt even worse when you knew 40 other people were watching you and judging you. Permission to depart, co-captain, he said. Hao-Yu's lips twitched a little. Yes, if you want to. Yes, Astrid agreed. Alden nodded. I'll run with her and make sure the trap isn't a problem. If you stay here with Jeffy, well, it's better. 2 of you to watch each other's backs. And Lucille and I will do the same. Nobody alone, more flexibility. Here, he slapped his cord down on top of the wall. He had a couple more pieces long enough to get himself and Lucille up here, if Hao-Yu couldn't hold the post until they got back. 5 minutes left, said Hao-Yu. Plenty of time. On his way out of the gym, Alden saw Winston pointing at Max and then at the ground in front of himself demandingly. Since Alden hadn't died, he didn't have to run the track 3 times before heading back to the gym. He was just going to hang out there and make sure Lucille didn't have any trouble. But when he got there, he saw she was already having trouble. She was really crying as she cleared hurdles one after the other. It's fine, Lucille, he said, standing on the edge of the track. The sun was getting low in the sky. I slept through half our first run, remember? You could die 3 more times, and you'd still accomplish more than I did in that race. I'm ruining it for you all. She overshot a hurdle by at least a yard and landed hard on the other side. I wanted to fight back, but I'm not good at guessing how hard I can hit when people come at me fast. Understandable. Nobody's mad. Nothing's ruined. We're still going to win because they're a shit team. He's supposed to be our most powerful fighter, especially with Marisol gone and Vandy countering the arrows, letting you all down. Lexi had to defend Everly. Lexi totally wanted to hit someone with Ryther, said Alden. And he got Medi. Medi's too stubborn to leave their course, so he's just hobbling around in there, hoping for I don't know what. It's all good, I swear. Lucille was rounding the track's second curve when she suddenly stopped going forward. Her feet were still moving, but each one of her bounding strides went absolutely nowhere. Yep, there it is, thought Alden. She stopped and stared down at her boots. Alden ran over to join her. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She was one of those people who got really red and puffy when they teared up. He could sympathize. I'm trapped, she said in a thick voice. You are. Thanks for finding that for us, he smiled. Want me to throw your rope, or do you just want to bust out of it by overwhelming it with super strength? I bet you could. One really forceful jump. Why are you so nice to me? She was scrubbing her eyes again. You should be mad. People make mistakes while they're trying to figure out their powers. Would you be mad if I made one? She was still looking at her boots. They're just going to attack me again, she said. As soon as I get back to the gym, I'll just mess up again. They should really focus on their own course instead of risking more attacks, said Alden. So maybe, she shook her head furiously. I heard Marcia say it to one of them on my way out, that she'd just let Winston keep... Maybe it would make me learn a lesson if an A took me down over and over. She was mad I wouldn't fight her the way she wanted in superlatives last week. Marcia's some kind of battle freak. They need to turn the gym's realism setting up all the way and see if that sobers up her ass. I think it's fine that you want to figure out how to take people down without killing them. I think it's good for you to practice that in whatever way works best for you. Maybe it's different than how I would do it. I don't really know. I'm not in your shoes. But this is class. Class is for practice. I'm at this school because it's an educational facility, and honestly, I find it tedious how almost everyone else seems to think it's a magical dick-measuring facility instead. She finally met his eyes. She looked a little alarmed. Alden shrugged. I hope Winston does attack you again, because I actually want to educate myself. I'm curious to see how a rabbit should fight a speed brute, so if he does, let me deal with it. What, you think I can't? No, I'm sure you can. Her eyes were wide. It's not the end of the world if I can't. I'll try. If I get hurt, you'll carry me over the finish line with your brute strength. If you get hurt, I'll tie you up in a bunch of rope and carry you over the finish line with my magic, right? She hesitated. Right? By the way, he added, I saw someone ripped in half by a strength brute once. It was gruesome. Probably saved my life. I really doubt Marcia has more insight into the matter than you or I do, so definitely don't listen to her opinion on how you want to handle your rank and class. He pointed at her. Now break out of that puny trap and run. Fast. Despite everything I just said about dick measuring, I don't want to lose to such an awful team. Catch me before I get to the gym. He turned to go. About 10 seconds passed before he heard a grunt, followed by the sound of boots hitting the pavement hard, as if the owner had landed from a particularly forceful jump. You're sure you don't want us to come back that way for you? How you asked. Or just me. We really should leave Jeffy in the water. We're fine, said Alden, crawling through the pipe behind Lucille. A blade of torn grass fell off the bottom of her shoes. Let's stick with the 2-and-2 plan for now. Is that good with you, Lucille? We're fine, she said. We've got this. Pause for a sec, Alden told her. Let me prep something before we exit the pipe while the other team can't see us. What? Brought something special for handling our faster classmates. Didn't expect I'd actually get to use it. Nobody ever asked the rabbit to go on the attack, after all. There were much more qualified people. Nice of Winston to make himself such a nuisance, he thought, pulling more of the blindingly yellow paracord free from his supply of it. Winston Heelfeather concentrated on every part of his body, the way the balls of his feet rested on the ground, the tension in his spine, the twist of the sickle in his right hand, then his left, then his right. Tossing it with an avowed grace was what he was going for, but you couldn't always tell how it looked until you'd seen the footage. He did the smile. One of the fans called it his looks could kill smile. It was a little one, but confident. Already beaten Ness twice, the caption would say. Do you guys think I'm brave enough to try it a third time? Presence was everything. Well, no. Power was better, but he had an A to work with, so he would work with it. There were some A's who were more famous than S's. Hotter, funnier, cooler. He would be one of them. They're coming out of the pipe. When to take her? What would look best? Not when she was on her knees escaping from the pipe. Even though Winston wasn't allowed to show the actual moment he killed her because of the rules about sharing images of other students, sometimes the video watchers really analyzed his movements. Those overzealous fans might notice the angle he approached his victims from, and realized he'd been going for someone on the ground. Bad look. He wished he could have one more attack, just one more, 3 times for the only S in class besides Cone that Marcia didn't want to fight herself, Then one for Alden Thorne. That guy needed to be taken down several notches. He was getting so much attention for having a cute face and a fucked up story, for being the stupidest in class and dropping a plate full of vegetables and singing about freaky alien birds that ate each other's. Winston's fans wanted to know more about him. Maybe I should go for him after all. No, focus on what mattered. Alden could go around polishing alien silverware and dropping carrots on other freckled orphans. Eventually it would stop being novel, and people would forget about him. It would go that way, it was just logic. What mattered was Winston building himself and his image, his legend. He watched Lucille emerge from the pipe. The rest of her team was at the other end of the course. She was scared to hit people too hard, so she was a sitting duck. Through the fire, he decided. The ice was getting thin. The melting water, a few flames, it was going to look great. Hey, have you got another speed boost for me? Max was lurking around Winston. Winston didn't know why. Someone who ran at purely human speeds should be booking it down the course so he wouldn't hold the rest of them up at this point, but since he was here... Going to attack Lucille again? The B-rank asked. She's got Alden with her. Better watch out. Winston narrowed his eyes. You being funny or something? Max glanced toward the other team. Alden was coming out of the pipe, a length of that fluorescent yellow rope in his hand. Sure, said Max. I happen to have just one more speed zone. Tell me where you want it and down it will go. Parachute cord was a type of kernmantle rope. Smaller inner strands were held together and protected from breakage by the woven exterior sheath. The outer sheaths came in lots of different colors, including shades so bright they almost hurt your eyes. The inner strands in most of Alden's paracord collection were white. The floor of the gymnasium was also white. The possibilities were obvious. But just in case he'd taken it a step further, some types of paracord, mostly meant for survivalists, had neat things inside them apart from the plain white cord, wires, fire starter strands, even fishing line. And it took no time at all to get at the stuff. You just grabbed the end of whichever interior strand you wanted and pulled. Came right out, inch by inch, foot by foot. Before they'd left the pipe, Alden had pulled some of his fishing line out. When he straightened it all out and preserved it, he had a very obvious paracord line several feet in length, with an even longer, but much less obvious, strand of fishing line sticking out at the end. Winston came for them as soon as they were on their feet, so quickly that Alden barely had time to admire his new tool. The speedster blasted through the melting fire obstacle, his feet shattering the very thin layer of ice left on the floor. He was moving at freeway speeds. At that speed, most people couldn't see strands of transparent fishing line. It turned out Winston Heelfeather couldn't either. Alden thrust the cord out, turning his wrist just in time to get it positioned parallel to the floor between the fire obstacle and Lucille. Then he felt the impact on his authority as Winston clotheslined himself and fell backwards. The other teen hit the floor hard, grabbing at his neck, a shocked expression on his face. Just that fast, it was over. Alden let his skill drop. Winston, running into it, almost had fatigued it the rest of the way anyway. Alden had pushed farther than he'd meant to. Other avowed directly striking the preserved object seems to hit harder than equivalent non-avowed forces. That kind of thing wasn't an unknown phenomenon. He just hadn't had a lot of personal experience with it. Magic clashing with magic. Authority versus authority. Winston had winded himself. He was still staring up at the ceiling in astonishment. All right, said Alden, stepping around him and hurrying toward the next obstacle before it could turn into an inferno. So that's done. Lucille, my skill's gone. I'll have to rely on you and Hao-Yu to get me past the weights and over the wall. Did you guys just take out Winston? Astrid called. What was that? I'm pretty sure Alden just decapitated him, said Hao-Yu. Let's win now, said Alden. I want to go eat Filipino food. The race ended with Lucille crossing the tightrope over the finish line. The bell rang, and an instant later they were all smiling. Half of the drama of the past 20 minutes forgotten in an instant. Astrid started doling out hugs to everyone. Beautiful land moves, she shouted in Jeffy's ear, pointing toward the other team's course. Look what you accomplished! In their water tank, Max was floating peacefully on his back. Aunt Marcia was upside down, her legs kicking wildly in the air as she tried to dive, and failed. Her glaive was at the bottom of the tank. She'd thrown it down there, no doubt planning to pull herself toward it that way, but it seemed like she'd overused the ability. Maricel said she was prone to overworking herself and running out of gas, Alden said. Guess it happened. Who would have thought a life jacket spell could be used to defeat people? Hao-Yu sounded amused as he watched Marcia struggle. Must be pretty strong. She's not going anywhere. If you cast it 8 times, you can make a really heavy truck float, Jeffy announced. I practiced it before I left home. It's good, said Alden. You beat Winston, Lexi said. Yeah, I kind of wanted to save that trick to try on Klein, but this was a worthy cause. Marcia kicked her feet so hard one of her shoes flew off, but she kept right on bobbing in the water like a cork.